You might be asking, what does the brain have to do with food and fitness? Shouldn't we be talking about macros and interval training? Well, actually, the brain has a ton to do with our food and fitness struggles, and in this video, I'll tell you why. My name is Rayanne Porte, and I'm a faith-based health coach. In this video, we're going to be talking all about our body physiology. Physiology is the study of the human body. I will be answering the question, how does knowing what is happening in our brain and our body when we struggle with food and fitness help us overcome our struggles with these things? Let's dive in. So, anytime that we're experiencing food and fitness struggles, whether that's overeating, undereating, chronic dieting, losing weight, gaining weight, anytime these things are happening, a lot of times we want to think that it's solely an external problem. But really, what's going on is that these actions around food and fitness are just a manifestation of a deeper problem, an internal problem. And really, what's going on is that there's a battle in our mind, and it's against the devil. So what's happening is that the devil is telling us lies about things that have happened to us in our conditioning, basically in order to force us to form false beliefs around who we are, who God is, and the role that food and fitness in our body play in our life. And when that happens, what subsequently then happens is that basically fear enters the picture. Anytime that fear is present, basically a good example would be fear of gaining weight, fear of our circumstances, fear of not gaining a certain person's approval, fear of certain foods. Anytime that fear is present, a whole chain of events takes place in our brain and in our body. And here's where we'll talk about our physiology. So let's bunny trail and talk about our brain for a minute. This is a picture of our brain. I am clearly no artist, so please just humor me. This is my 1 second quick picture, me drawing a picture of our brain. This is the front part of our brain, our forehead, and this is the back part of our brain. So in the front part of our brain, it's called the prefrontal cortex. So things that happen in the prefrontal cortex are self-control. It houses our motor control, like control of our limbs, planning, reasoning. It's the part of our brain that's the last to develop. That's basically why toddlers are super impulsive and they have temper tantrums. Like their prefrontal cortex is not yet developed. Well, the amygdala is a different part of our brain, and it's located at the base of our brain. That forms earlier because one of the things that is located in the amygdala is our fight or flight response. So what is our fight or flight response? Well, another name for it is our survival mechanism, and that's exactly what its purpose is. Its sole purpose is to keep us safe and to keep us alive. And so if you think about back in the day, our ancestors, they used this part of our brain very frequently because if you think about their day-to-day life, they definitely needed it. So the physical dangers that they might have experienced would have been weather, animals, food scarcity. So literally this part of our brain, or this part of their brain, kept them alive in the day-to-day because they had to make very quick decisions a lot of the time. Like if an animal is coming at them, they got to run, right? Well, in today's day, much different civilization, right? We still do have physical dangers, like for that these physical dangers do force our amygdala to become engaged. One example would be I put my hand on the stove. Before I even really know what's going on, my amygdala has sent a message to my prefrontal cortex saying, pick up your hand off of the stove. Our prefrontal cortex controls our limb movements. And so the amygdala immediately sees the threat, hot stove, sends a message to my prefrontal cortex, and I immediately pick up my hand, right? Another good example would be, let's say you're outside gardening and normally your neighbor's dog is on a leash, but something happens and it gets off its leash and it's all of a sudden you look up and your neighbor's dog is running right at you. Before you know it, you are up and running straight into the house to get away from the dog. Well, what happens in the body when the fight or flight response is engaged? Well, all of the blood moves to our heart and our large muscles, like our thighs and our arms, because it's literally preparing for us to fight or to run away. Adrenaline and cortisol are released, and those things give us quick energy, the energy that we need to act quickly. Our heartbeat might be raised, we might start sweating. Digestion basically shuts down because that's part of a bodily function that just isn't needed when you need to run away or fight. And so another example of the fight or flight would be excitement. So it's not always fear how we might traditionally think, but it can be engaged when you are just excited. Like say you do a really good job at work and your boss wants you to present a project in front of your team. So you don't often present in front of a room full of people. So that brings a little bit of nerves. Even though you're really excited to do it and you feel confident in what you're sharing, it still is a little bit kind of like nerve-wracking, a little bit of fear. Well, your fight or flight is also engaged in that. It's all part of our central nervous system. So how does this relate to food and fitness? Well, if our brain is experiencing a threat to our survival, it's very helpful to know that it will send us messages to do whatever it takes for us to feel safe. So let's think about that for a minute. So whether the threat is real or perceived, the brain sees it the same way. Whether it's an acute threat or whether it's chronic, and whether the threat is physical or psychological, the brain still sees it as a threat. So let me give you a couple examples of how this plays out when we talk about food and fitness specifically. First, I just want to say that our fight or flight response is a good thing. In certain situations, it is extremely helpful and it does truly keep us alive. But in certain situations, especially when the devil is telling us lies and then we start to form fears based off of those lies, it's helpful to know what's going on so we can start to replace those lies with truth and then hand those fears over to God. So let me give you 2 examples of how this relates to food and fitness. And hopefully this will help illustrate how our physiology plays a role in all of this. So the first example is the diet. Sometimes you might hear it called the diet binge cycle, or it's basically just an under overeat cycle, or you might also hear restriction and overindulge. So what happens when we start to sink into this type of struggle or this type of cycle? What started out the cycle was a lie from the devil where he might have told you, oh, your worth is based in your appearance. And so without us even really knowing, we might have started to develop the fear of gaining weight, or the fear of not gaining somebody's approval, or the fear of not staying at the weight that you're at, or a fear of certain foods. And so we started out of that fear, we started to kind of change our actual behaviors with food and fitness to conform to, or like to basically follow that belief. Well, when we start to eat a certain way, what inevitably ends up happening is that our brain starts to then, where we started out fearing gaining weight, our brain then starts to take hold of the fear of restriction. And what that means is basically when we start to control our own eating habits and our eating behaviors, our brain starts to get the sense of, oh man, I'm fearing like I'm not getting everything that I want and I need. A good example would be like if you go to a party, the fear of gaining weight would say, oh, don't eat the cookie, don't eat the cookie, don't eat the cookie. But then enters the fear of, restriction, your brain is really now solely focused on what you are denying it. In your brain, it's only registering cookie, 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 because it's basically you're trying so hard to not have that thing, it's becoming obsessed with it. So now it feels like it's not getting what it thinks it needs, even if you truly are eating enough, like eating a caloric intake that is adequate for you. It still is feeling deprived. And anytime that the body is feeling deprived, again, it will do anything it can to get what it thinks it needs. So the minute that you eat a cookie, your lower brain starts to send messages to your upper brain of keep eating, get all that you can, because it foreshadows another upcoming phase of restriction again. Like, oh, I need to eat everything I can tonight, or I can eat everything I can tonight because tomorrow I'm going to start back up on my diet. And so then the next day you fall right back into this fear of gaining weight. So then you start back up on your diet, and then you inevitably, the fear of restriction brings you right back into that overindulge phase. And so then you end up swinging back and forth. And then hormones get all out of whack inside your body, because basically when you start dieting, you're not truly eating when you're actually hungry. You're eating when you're supposed to be eating, because in the back of your mind, you're eating in order to look a certain way. So you might be denying your hunger hormone. And when you end up overindulging, you might start losing a sense of your fullness hormone. You lose sense of when you're actually full. And so those two hormones get all out of whack. Leptin, and then I'm falling short on the name of the other one. But then also the other thing that happens is when overindulgence is present, other chemicals are going on in your brain, like serotonin and dopamine, and those are released because of the pleasure of eating food. So basically, there's a lot going on in your body. And then when we end up in this cycle, the other thing that happens is we start to form a habit of it. And so again, the brain is just doing what it's supposed to do. The brain is meant to be extremely efficient. So anytime it picks up on a repeated behavior, it thinks it needs to keep doing it. That's how our brain learns how to do everything we know to do pretty much automatically. So that's why it's so hard to get out of this diet binge cycle, if you will, when we get caught in it. Second example is emotional overeating. So in this situation, we might have developed a fear of our circumstances because the devil might have told us lies about our circumstances, like you can't handle stressful times, or you aren't safe when certain circumstances come up in your life. And so what our body does, our brain, and the devil gets in there, and the devil basically makes you think that, oh, I need to go to food in order to feel that sense of safety and comfort. And so what ends up happening is you end up turning to food in order to feel safe and feel comforted. And what might happen is when your circumstances change and you end up in a season where everything seems to be going okay, you might think that, oh, I'm not struggling with food anymore. But then lo and behold, if circumstances take a downturn, you might end up going right back to that because you haven't addressed that underlying lie that the devil is telling you and the fear that's coming out of it. Eek. So basically in all of this, the important takeaway is that, again, the brain and the body are doing what they're supposed to do, but the brain always does what it thinks it needs to do to keep us safe. So we can now turn the conversation to how to get out of these struggles and out of these cycles and what we do with these fears in order to heal from our struggles. Now that we've talked about our physiology and how it relates to our food and fitness struggles, now I'll give you 5 tangible things that you can do today to start to overcome your food and fitness struggles based on what we talked about. First is we can believe that we can get out of the cycle. So whether you relate more to the diet binge cycle or whether you relate more to this on again, off again emotional overeating cycle, or whether you have a whole separate food struggle altogether. Either way, when we believe that we can get out of the struggle, it changes everything. Or when we believe we can get out of the cycle, it changes everything. Because up until now, it's been so hard to get out of the cycle because we didn't know what was happening. We didn't know what was truly going on in our body and our brain. But now that we know, that's most of the work right there. Now it's just a matter of retraining our brain to get our body on our side. So we can start to replace the lies that the devil has told us. We can start to break down the fears that are not serving us any longer. Then our hunger and our fullness hormone will start to come back, and we'll start to be able to recognize true hunger and honor it. And we'll start to recognize when we are actually full. And then after that, we'll be able to start to build helpful habits instead of this cycle being the habit. And then we'll start to see that our body actually can live in this homeostasis that we didn't even know existed because we've just been in this cycle for so long. That is the super encouraging message in all of this. If you are one that impulsively or compulsively eats, I do want to give you hope. If you find yourself in a very acute situation where you feel like your amygdala has hijacked your body, there are certain things that you can do to get out of that. And let's just say, for example, not binge eat. So there are certain breathing techniques and exercises or certain movement techniques and exercises, but basically you're trying to regulate your nervous system so that your amygdala stops hijacking you, right? And so that you can get back in that rest and digest state, the parasympathetic part of your nervous system. But what I would recommend for you to do is go back and watch my previous videos on taking your thoughts captive and claiming victory over them. And those videos will start to be a guide for you to get out of this impulsive and compulsive behavior around food. Okay, secondly, we can go to God with our fears. And when we go to God with our fears, it's just like my emotion video that I did previously. We can not ignore the fear, nor buy into it either. So when we take our fears to God, we can recognize, oh, I have this fear. The devil has been telling me this lie for years. It's very natural to have a fear about gaining weight because he's been telling me this lie. So that fear, I'm not going to push down that fear or shun it or ignore it. But at the same time, I can choose to not obey it or buy into it either. So it's very much like living in a state of knowing that in this world there will be trouble, but take heart, I have overcome this world. So the Bible also says we are hard pressed, but we're not crushed. We are struck down, but we are not destroyed. God works out all things for the good of those who love him. Consider it pure joy when you face trials and sufferings, because it brings perseverance. So it's living in this world of recognizing I have this fear, I have this emotion, but God is going to help me lay down that fear to him and not obey it. Thirdly, we can tell our higher brain to talk to our lower brain and tell it the truth. So in a previous video, I talked all about the truth of who we are, who God is, and the role that food and fitness in our body plays in our life. We're going to want to, when we feel like we're in a state or a phase where we're overcome by fear, we can tell our higher brain those truths, or our higher brain can tell our lower brain those truths that we can stand on, and that will be super helpful. Fourth, in our day-to-day, we can put on our armor, and this is just a daily defensive tactic in our Christian life to be prepared for when the devil comes with a lie or with a fear. We can read the Bible, we can pray, we can slow down our pace of life, we can take part in physical activity that we enjoy. All of these things are helping us stay in this rest and digest mode so that we can start to recognize when a fear starts to take over, right? And then the last thing is get a community. Get a community of friends that instead of talking about their diet, they're talking about all the things that God is doing in their life, or they're talking about all the good things that they know God to be, right? So that is huge and can be super helpful in your journey coming out of your food and fitness struggles. So if you start to put some of these, or a few of these 5 things into practice, what will we start to see? 1, like I just mentioned, we'll recognize when the devil is telling a lie or when fear is starting to come in. And not only that, but we'll start to see it as not as harmful as we might have in the past, meaning that, again, we have the victory over it. But it's really truly creating in us a closer and deeper and more intimate relationship with Christ, and we're gaining perseverance through it, just like that verse I just quoted said. And lastly, we'll start to recognize when we kind of need to be in more of a trust mode. Like in previous videos, I've talked a little bit about this. Like a lot of times in life when, things seem to be going quote unquote good, those are the times when we can really express gratitude towards God. God, thank you so much for this blessing. This is totally from you. Then when things, get a bit more difficult, that's when trust mode kicks in, right? So if a fear is coming at us, we immediately know we can go to God, and that's when we need to start having the trust in Him. So it's that gratitude and that trust that we can really start to see the differentiation in our life. In any given moment in life, there's always things to be grateful for and always things to trust. But depending on what's going on, we might be more in one season versus the other season. So I hope you found this video helpful today, and I will see you here next week.